Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Joey, the 9mm Musashi. How you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
Good. So without further ado, I just want to dive into Musashi. Let's talk about the greatest swordsman who ever lived.
Yeah, so when I got onto social media, I actually started under the username Desert Plinker because when I was younger, I'd go out to the desert in Barstow area in Southern California and be shooting out there with friends. Partway through, I realized that I wanted to kind of do a little bit more with the social media side of things. And the reason I used Musashi is, obviously, I'm sure you're aware, but he wrote the Book of Five Rings, which is a pretty pivotal piece as far as tactics. And then in Japan, it's very well known. It's used for business strategy and stuff like that. So I just respected the training aspect of what Musashi did. And I like alliteration, which is why my username is 9mm Musashi.
I was just thinking that, you read it, but then when I was saying it in my head, I was like, millimeter Musashi, you definitely have the alliteration. So I dig it, man. The Book of Five Rings, it's so big. And I love that these older texts, or I guess we could say sources of wisdom, can be so applicable to so many things, right? It's not just martial arts, swordsmanship. You talked about tactics and business. People cite the art of war frequently for business. And so I love that, man.
Yeah. And the art of war is definitely better known here. But, I am ethnically, I was born in Japan. I was a Japanese citizen until I joined the army. I was a dual citizen, but I wanted something that touched on my heritage there.
I dig it, man. Do they make you choose a lane at the point when you enlist?
So I actually did not enlist. I did ROTC at UCLA, and I'm sure we're kind of going to get into my background. But
yeah.
The nice thing about doing ROTC, one, it paid for college at UCLA. And the other cool thing is Army ROTC, at least at the time, was the one branch that allowed you to go directly into the reserve. So I started my law enforcement career right after I graduated college instead of going active duty. Because originally I wanted to go to West Point. I had the congressional nomination, and two of the cadre at UCLA, who were actually both West Point grads, were kind of the people that convinced me to go to UCLA, which ended up being pretty important in the long term.
What was it like growing up in Japan? When did you move?
So I actually did not grow up in Japan. We visited pretty much every year, but I moved to America when I was pretty young. We started out in Massachusetts and then moved out to Southern California. So I'd say California is home. I've done most of my growing up and living here.
Now, was military service something that was always a fixture in your head growing up?
I think so. I think I was always interested in the military. And then, like I said, I did want to go to West Point. I was originally set on going active duty. But the good thing about doing ROTC was, one, it gave me a regular college experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I mentioned, they were the only branch at the time that gave the option to go directly into the reserves. I actually started LAPD's academy the Monday after I graduated from UCLA.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you just jumped right in the thick of it from, college, you're doing ROTC, and then you get right into LAPD academy hired on.
Yep.
Very cool. And how did your family feel about military and law enforcement? It's not super prevalent in Asian American culture.
My dad is actually white, even though he speaks Japanese, lived in Japan and everything. His big thing was he wanted to make sure I would be an officer. His father was actually in the military in World War II, and he was an officer as well, I believe. And so that was kind of his big push, is he really wanted to make sure that I was an officer. As far as the law enforcement side of things, I don't think anyone really saw that coming. That wasn't something that I was really set on until pretty much my senior year of college. I decided that I wanted to do the law enforcement route.
Yeah, same for me, man. It was like a total shift for me. So what prompted that for you?
I think a lot of why I wanted to do the military, I saw that I could have those same things as a law enforcement officer. Specifically, it's something that keeps you challenged, keeps you entertained. No 2 days are the same. Just the concept of, helping people in service is kind of a underlying theme for both the military and law enforcement. And it's something that I realized I could, at a local level, people needed help too, just like on an international level, people need help. And I saw it as a chance to continue with those themes of service and everything at a local level.
And have you reflected on your experiences from the military and police and how they built on each other or assist each other maybe from leadership perspectives or tactics or all the above?
Yes. So I think that's one of the things that I've noticed more recently. I just finished up a rotation as a company commander. So that was a little over 2 years in command. And I wouldn't say, first off, I'm not going to say that I'm some great leader because I'm not. Kind of watching what I learned as a leader in the military and then seeing some of those themes played out by specifically the admin at my police department where I currently work. I noticed a lot of those two kind of overlapping, and I see the admin at my current department doing a lot of things right. The culture that, my battalion commander on the military side of things was trying to create, I see a lot of those same things playing out at my PD.
It's always nice when you can reflect and see those good movements, right? The good decisions, the good messaging, the good themes, or the good programs. I don't know if it's just because we have a cynical culture or because we easily focus on the negative, but you do hear so many of our colleagues, our peers, across the nation, men and women talking about problematic leadership or admins aren't getting it right.
It's a huge issue, and obviously I run police post training, which I do talk to a lot of police officers each week, and I kind of see some of the issues that are nationwide. And obviously we have recruitment issues, morale, culture issues going on in law enforcement, and that's one of the things that I am super appreciative is the culture and atmosphere and environment that I get to work in now at my current department, and kind of constantly being reminded of that and counting my blessings because of that.
Talking about social media, kind of curious what got you into being more active on social media. You have 9mm Musashi, you have police post training. What prompted all that?
So that's actually kind of a funny story too. I created my personal Instagram account when I was overseas on a little army vacation, all expenses paid. I basically created it for friends and family to just kind of show some of the fun stuff I was doing. And then while I was just scrolling through Instagram one day, somebody asked a question about a firearm, and I answered the question, and the person responded like, "Hey, thanks for answering the question." And I, at that point, was like, "Hey, I could kind of share resources and share some of the knowledge and stuff that I have." So that's why I created my public account, which is now the 9mm Musashi account. About 7 years ago, I got noticed by the right person, which is Adam over at Police Posts. He brought me on board to run the Police Post training page, which originally was supposed to kind of be a backup account for Police Posts because they were worried about, accounts getting deleted and stuff, which has been an issue within Instagram. And it has just kind of taken off on its own. So, the Police Post training thing is me just trying to give back to the law enforcement community, provide some of the knowledge and training that I've been lucky enough to take part in. And then the 9mm Musashi page is just me being a nerd and posting stuff that I like.
No, I dig it. And I love how it's almost funny because you're like, well, where social media started was I was just taking pictures of stuff and sharing it with, my friends and family, which is really kind of the original point of most social media. But I love how it grew organically, right? Someone reaches out and then you're able to provide insight and resource, and that's where it's grown, right? And I love that you're putting that out forward, right? We talk about leadership, and we're probably going to talk a lot more about leadership and wellness and these things that we both care about. But at the same time, at the crux of it is operationally sound decisions and best practice and tactics and safety. Like at the end of the day, the point of being a legitimate police officer is that you can handle the job and all the rigors of it and be safe, right? And go home. At the base of it, I love that you help with a platform that instills that. To your point, there's definitely a lot of agencies that do have a robust training regimen and staff and practice. I also feel very fortunate to have that in my region. But when we think about the national landscape and a lot of these pretty atrocious looking videos, it is important to recognize that there's a training gap for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of unfortunate. Obviously I have some different perspectives on it, coming from a huge department and then now working for a department that has less than 100 officers. but I think they are doing a pretty good job as far as getting continued training and empowering subordinate leadership to go out and get additional training and bring that back to the PD. And that's something I'm not necessarily teaching anyone on police post training. It's more about encouraging people to get out, get training, get actual training, not just reading an Instagram caption and sharing that. And a lot of the captions, if you read, it's not me saying like, this is how you need to do it every time. It's look at this situation, go sit down with your shift and talk about industry best practices and how you could safely work through this problem. Because a lot of it is, there is no new problems. It's just the same problems with new people dealing with them. So kind of tabletopping it as a patrol shift or a SWAT team and figuring out how you might work through it. And obviously kind of to play devil's advocate, people say, oh, coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's easy to talk about it when you're not in the situation. But on the flip side, it is getting a mental rep to where some of these situations that you're seeing people go through, you say, like, if this happens to me, this is ideally how we would react. And by getting that mental rep, you kind of ingrain it in the shift on what expectations there are and kind of making a predictable pattern for yourself and for those on your shift.
Yeah, 100%. And, I've shared a number of videos on mine. It's not the main focus of mine, but sometimes it hits a nerve or it's something really impactful with something I saw, when my guy's dealing with or something I've been through, where a lot of times, it's not supposed to Monday morning quarterback. It's just to bring awareness, right? To make us better. I'm not trying to, throw shade at the officer that got hurt or the suspect ran away because they didn't have control of the person. Like that, I'm not trying to disparage it. Like there are lessons to be learned. Like, hey, maybe we should be more aware of our fitness level and do something about that. But at the same time, it might go back to simple practice, right? Like bring out the cuffs after you have the person in control. And I saw one of your more recent posts, which is just more explanatory, where, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was your page where officers didn't have control of a subject who was wanted for murder, and then he basically broke free and propelled himself out of the upper story window of a building. And not just to bring light to that, but even in the comments someone was like, well, that makes it easier, right? And you're like, well, actually no, it's an in custody death and it's a big deal, and that brings a lot of stress, that brings a lot of work. And these conversations I think are just very impactful, especially if we're going to bridge with the community. A lot of people that look at your page or law enforcement pages aren't actually competent with law enforcement practice.
Yeah, and that's kind of another issue I see nationwide is some of the attitudes where in that video that you're referring to, I think it was attempt homicide, but the dude did pull away and dove through the window and ended up dying. And many of the comments were kind of joking about, well, save the taxpayer the trouble of a trial and prison time and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that those making those comments understand what being the subject of an internal affairs investigation, a criminal investigation, a lawsuit, all those factors. I'm pretty sure you've never been through that if that's your kind of takeaway or attitude. And I mean, there's another example where I was discussing taser deployment, and it was on the officer was chasing after someone who was already handcuffed, who same situation had broke away, and the officer had his taser out, and I basically said, hey, this might not be optimal to have your taser out in this situation because you want both hands free, you want to be able to run effectively, et cetera, et cetera. And one of my commentaries was that, an appropriate time for a taser potentially is when somebody is armed, obviously not with a gun, but having appropriate layered protection, so having lethal coverage. And someone in the comments wrote something like, oh, if someone has any type of weapon, like, I'm going to shoot them. And I'm like, dude, I don't think you understand the gravity and the seriousness of the trust that the public should be putting in us in these situations, if that's your mentality. Yeah. And I really don't think you've been in a shooting or been in a lawsuit if you're making comments like that.
Certainly haven't. And I think, people that say that it's just easy. And there's probably different types, right? There's some people that say it to get a rise and kind of be that troll, and other people that just have no awareness. And it's not to give them an excuse. It does make it slightly better if they don't have that awareness. But yeah, man, like that's a big deal. Like no one wants to tase someone and have them fall and get, brain damage or get killed, because we've seen those, right? And it's not constructive, right? Like why those kinds of comments, they're just pretty useless.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to circle back and summarize, I'd say it's beneficial for sure. I think more often than not, my guys, when I was running a patrol crew, and the guys that work under my watch now, more often than not, they review a video or two. There's just so much to be learned. And, I work at a pretty busy agency, and there's a decent amount of things like foot chases and use of force and violent crime. And so it's not like they're not getting reps, but it's just that much better. And right, so especially we talk about training budgets and staffing levels to pull people off the street for training. What better way than to just review a video or two? And again, like you said, just talk it through as a crew, because you might have different policies, you might have different laws that allow you to do or not do certain things. And so why would you not just discuss it? Why would you not discuss it as a crew so that you could have best practice and you guys are all aligned in what your thinking is and how you'd approach it? Because you may run into a situation very much like that one, and you'll know exactly what to do. You'll take the guesswork out.
Yeah, it's all about getting those mental reps that I talked about. And like you said, obviously there are constraints as far as training budgets and everything. It costs you $0 to pull up a video during briefing and let it play out and discuss as a shift within your own parameters as far as staffing and equipment available, kind of what-ifing that a little bit and playing it out and getting those mental reps. That is a form of training. It's not hands-on, it's not force-on-force, but there's still definitely value in it, and it's free.
100%. We're talking about coming from a big agency, and I think about training and the things I've heard about really big agencies, and LAPD is one of the biggest. So I wonder sometimes if, like, categorically, it's just hard for these really big entities, because of the bureaucracy involved and because of just the sheer size, for them to address some specific training. Or, maybe that goes to leadership. You have such a big machine. Is it easier for an agency your size, fewer than 100, or my size between 150 and 200? Is it just easier to have that more personal touch? And not to excuse the huge agencies, but have you thought much about that and just the dynamics of what it would take to bring a huge agency or a really large agency up to speed on that?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to get a huge agency, especially the size of LAPD, which I'm not sure where they're at right now, but between 8 and 10,000, I think. There's 21 geographic divisions in LA, and each different division is basically its own police department. And then you have all the specialties. So you have Metro, that has SWAT, K9, and they're all going to be kind of, they've got their own training, and everything should be somewhat consistent. But obviously with an agency that size and being as busy as it is, it's really difficult to get everyone on the same page. I can tell you, after graduating the academy, I have weeks that I log more training hours at my current agency than I did an entire year at LA on patrol. And that's with me being, like, my full-time gig at my current agency is patrol, but I have all these different collateral duties as far as, firearms instructor, first aid instructor. I'm on our SWAT team. And the neat thing about my agency is that we frequently send people to different trainings to have them bring that back. And because we are less than 100 officers, our in-service trainings can get everyone on the same page very quickly. And we do them pretty frequently. For a while, we were doing them pretty much every month. I think this year we're cutting down to once a quarter.
Monthly is amazing. I love that.
Yeah, it's good, getting everybody a 12-hour training day. And it's helpful because that way, if you're working overtime with a different shift, you know that they're going to be on the same page as far as how to handle different things tactically. Again, the other neat thing with my collateral duties and the trust that the department has put in me, I've had times where they're just like, hey, you get the whole department for the week for firearms training, do whatever you want with some left and right limits. and trained the whole department 5 days, 12-hour days. So I was burned out at the end of it.
Yeah, that's a long week.
Getting people all that training, and like I had someone say like, hey, I've been a cop for 17 years and I've never had anyone break down fundamentals the way that you did. And I'm not doing anything groundbreaking. I've had the good luck of getting to go to all these different classes and then getting to bring back those different elements that I learned in those classes and kind of putting it together in a way that hopefully officers receive well.
Well, that's awesome. Where my head went talking about like large agencies is thinking about larger organizations, and especially with your background in the military, probably be really impossible. You get every sort of response that people ask is leadership strong in the Army? Is leadership strong in the Navy? Like, it probably really depends on what unit you worked in, right? And you can't just paint it all with a broad stroke when it's that big. It is all these micro organizations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the tale as old as time of like senior Army leadership being out of touch with what's going on at a company level or at a battalion level or whatever. So during my time as a company commander, I had the fortune of working for a really good battalion commander who, again, really emphasized unit culture and all those different things that made my company that much better. But leadership positions within the military, like anything else, are very temporary. I did 25 months as a commander. That's kind of long because usually it's a lot of times it's only an 18-month rotation. And I saw a lot of really good things from my unit. I got blessed with having an amazing first sergeant for the second half of my command time who just, incredible leader who just cared so much about the soldiers and enforcing standards without being a dick about it. And my executive officer who ended up taking over the company, another incredible leader who crushing it in every aspect. But then I've seen at a higher level, our battalion commander not being supported, me not being supported by these higher echelons. And that's kind of the nature of the beast of a huge bureaucracy. That's just what happens a lot of times.
25, so it'd be more typically 18.
Correct.
Do you know the reason why that rotation would be pretty swift?
I probably should have an answer for that, but I'm not really sure.
No, it's okay. The reason why I bring it up is I can consider pros and cons, right? I've had a couple assignments where they were traditionally 5-year assignments, and I was like, there's no way I'm being here for 5 years. One is that I can't imagine growing for 5 years, and I also don't want to take up a seat for other people to grow in 5 years. And then putting in for those assignments, some of which the boss running it was like, no, all I need is 2 years from you max, maybe 1 year. One was recruiting, and I did about 1.5 years. We were able to make a lot of ground, and I was able to promote. Like, that's a fantastic opportunity for me and then someone else to get that experience as well. But I do feel like that's fast under most circumstances just because our recruiting was a very unique circumstance, right? Like, there's certainly a ton more to build in that unit and hiring and mentorship and maybe building an internship, like all these laundry list things that I intended to do but didn't have the time or got to it. So yeah, when I hear 18 months, I'm like, man, that's pretty quick, especially when we're talking about building culture and you have to take time to build trust and start normalizing some of these practices and getting in sync with each other with your junior command and other leadership.
I think part of it is company command is just so incredibly taxing and stressful. I had a smaller company because of what our mission is, and I think I had 55 soldiers on paper, whereas a lot of times most companies are a lot bigger than that. The advantage I had was I was the executive officer before I took command, so I knew a lot of these soldiers, and I was also a platoon leader within the same company before I was the executive officer.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing was I had seen this company under 2 different commanders before I took command, and I'd been a part of it. So I feel like a lot of the trust was already there. But nonetheless, being a commander, it sucks. Straight up. It's awesome. It's incredibly rewarding. And some of the conversations I had with the soldiers, like there's no way we would have had those conversations if I didn't have that trust built. But it's also, like I said, incredibly taxing and stressful. You're personally liable for everything that happens, and you're like signed for. I think I had $16 million of equipment where if something goes wrong, like I could potentially be on the hook for that,
Yeah. What does that look like?
So not good. It's tiring. So I think that's part of the reason why command is typically not too long.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good organizational awareness to build that in if that's the reason.
Like I said, I probably should know why it's 18 to 24 months, but I'm not sure.
No worries. As we talk about leadership, and you spoke a little bit about how some of the leadership wins and good practice that you saw in the military had consistencies with your new agency, You want to talk about what some of those were?
Yeah. And so just to be clear, I've been at my current department. This is 8 years now. So it's been a little bit. This is my forever home.
Yeah, you're a veteran now.
Like I said, this month will be 8 years here. I was with LA for a couple years before. I'm going to acknowledge that some of the stuff I say is going to sound super spoiled. And that's what I love about working here. There's just a big emphasis placed on wellness and culture at my department. And it's something, if you talk about leadership, but you don't live it, subordinates see right through that real quick. Again, my chief has less than 100 officers. I think we have about 130 total with all of our non-sworn positions. He still knows everyone. I get a handwritten birthday card from him every year. Like a couple weeks ago, we were having SWAT training. We were just having a little team meeting before we started training, and he popped his head in, and we made eye contact. He said hi to everyone. And then later in the day, he texted me and he's like, "Hey, Joey, give me a call when you get the chance." I called him. And he said, "Hey, it looked like you had something on your mind. Did you want to talk to me about something? Are you okay?" I think I was just having an ADHD moment when he popped his head in. I was probably thinking about other stuff. But, the fact that he's that kind of tuned in to even just paying attention to his officers' facial expressions, he's someone who's super genuine. And I really like working for this dude.
Nice.
And to be clear, I'm not trying to promote. I'm happy as a patrol officer. I'm planning on being a patrol officer for the entirety of my career, so don't be thinking I'm some kind of brown noser.
No, but
I
that
do
also probably means
believe that about him.
Yeah, you're not blasting his name out. But that also means, before I don't mean to tangent, but you don't intend to promote, but you're doing all these things, which probably means you should promote. So I'm just going to plant that seed and let you marinate on that. But no, what I hear is that he's walking the talk, right? He's doing
Absolutely.
The things he talks about that he wants to see. He's embodying it.
Yeah, and that's that culture thing, and what I said earlier about subordinates seeing through if you're not authentic. He talks about service from the heart, and he's constantly talking about what's important to him as a leader and what kind of qualities his officers embody.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're fake and you're a politician about it, no one's going to buy into it. And that's one of the great things. But I think that's there's a trickle down effect to where our SWAT team commander, who just promoted to captain, he's someone that we text regularly. He sends me podcasts. I send him podcasts. He'll give me books, that kind of thing. Where at every level, from the chief all the way down to the patrol sergeants, there's that individual investment in officers. And that's what I love about working here. I have so many stories about stuff that our leadership and admin have done to take care of me or other officers. We'd be here all day going through those. It all goes back to just showing people that you care about them at an individual level. And that's what gets people to perform. If you don't care, and again, I talk to so many officers every week and hear about kind of the toxicity within law enforcement leadership communities. So many people who are just clearly in it for their own title and their own pay and just make everything miserable for the officers that work for them. I see none of that at my department, and I'm constantly just feel so fortunate that I fell into this department.
Oh, that's amazing. Without revealing the department, did something key you in on that when you were looking to make a switch and move?
The reason I work for the department I do now is actually it's my wife's hometown.
Okay.
And so when I was looking to leave LAPD, it was always the goal. My wife, I met at fall quarter freshman year of college. We have been together ever since. And we always knew that the long-term goal was to come back up to the Bay Area for her. My family's down in SoCal, but her family lives about 7 miles away from us now. But they live where I work, which is awesome because, I have a baby. And so a couple days a week, the baby's over at the in-laws and I can pop by on duty and see her. So that was actually the reason that I actually looked at this department in the first place. It was my wife's hometown. And then just everything about the application process, I just felt at home. I was in the process with a few other agencies at the same time in the Bay Area of California. And I just never got the same vibe throughout the interview process and that's, again, going back to the culture thing, that's how you attract people. Because my first oral board with my current department, I sat down and within not even 2 minutes, we were all just laughing our asses off, joking around. And not to say that, we're just a bunch of clowns 24/7. We're serious when we need to be. But the culture, like they were roasting me like pretty immediately, and I'm like, this place is awesome.
Yeah.
And it's cool to see where all those on my oral board panel. So 2 of them are captains now. One is a lieutenant and one has retired, and all of them have kind of this department special for me. And it all kind of started off with that first oral board where immediately I felt welcomed, I felt at home. Whereas with other departments, like I had one department, I cracked a joke on the oral board and like a bunch of stone-faced individuals. And I'm like, okay, so I guess we don't have fun around here. That's cool. Yeah. All the way down to like the week that I got my offer from my department, I got another offer from another agency, and my dad like did the math, and he's like, look, if you go to this other department, you'll make $1 million more over the course of your career. And
dang,
like that should tell you something, that I turned out an extra $1 million to work for the department I do now.
Yeah, man, what a recruiting plug for not this podcast per se, but when you do have young guys and gals checking out the department, do ride-alongs, trying to suss it out, and maybe your recruiting team or your brass is like, hey, we want this one. I want you to take her on a ride-along, right, and sell the place. That's huge, man. And like what I hear is fit. You recognize a cultural fit. They've probably felt it across the table with you. You felt it back, whereas the other agency, like they clearly didn't really want much to do with you, and you reciprocated that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's so huge. And even going back to what you were saying about your chief, it even sounds just like emotional intelligence, right? He was keying in on what he perceived, which may have been just you scatterbrained, your head going a ton of places because you're training, and he looks over at you and it's not what you normally present as, so he's checking in. What a powerful, simple way to show that he cares.
That goes down all the way down to, the sergeant level and the individual level. The sergeants I've worked for here have been awesome, and I'm going to give a quick example of our last shift. My sergeant, who just promoted to lieutenant, there was a kind of gray area case where I didn't feel comfortable like physically arresting the dude, and he was kind of leaning towards, hey, maybe we should arrest this dude.
Mm-hmm.
We had like a pretty in-depth discussion on the thing, and at the end he's like, look, I don't agree with you, but I'm going to back you whatever your decision is, and I'm never going to tell you to do something you're not comfortable doing with.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's the kind of thing that builds trust in officers or in soldiers, when you show that you're actually going to back up your subordinates. And I had my reasons for my decision-making process. He had his, still would do the same thing that I did, but the fact that he was willing to kind of take that risk, and then afterwards, like we had a pretty emotional discussion about it. Not emotional, like we weren't crying or anything. It was just like some loud voices.
It was heated, and everything. There was some tension.
Passionate. At the end of it, he sent me a text, and he's like, I really appreciate that you were willing to bet on yourself, and I appreciate you standing up for your convictions and what you believe in. Like that's the kind of thing I'm not going to forget that. As he continues on his promotion track, like I'm always going to remember that about him.
This reminds me of a situation where I was just a witness to it. I wasn't on the call. I was just a witness as a young officer to a senior officer, and how devastated isn't the right word. He was just pissed, right? The senior officer was so mad that he had made this arrest on a domestic, and then the sergeant that reviewed it, that wasn't on the scene, just reading the paper, says, you don't have PC, call the jail to have him released. He was so mad, and I think so much of that went to not gaining common ground, right? He just read the paper and then, had him make a decision, his decision, right? Undo it. I've had the fortune to supervise briefly that senior officer as a sergeant, and testament to how you remember like your situation really positively. I brought it up as a joke because, he's reviewing officer work now, and he leveling with them in a different way and asking questions, because maybe there wasn't probable cause properly articulated in the report, right? Maybe upon asking some questions and firming out some details, it was fine, but he takes it such a different way because of that memory. And me bringing it up to him instantly, he cracked a smile. He's like, oh man, you're trying to get me all riled up, huh? So it's something that we both remembered in such a significant way because, he knew what that felt like to not be backed, right? Literally the opposite of the memory that you described.
Yeah, absolutely. People don't forget.
And it's a good little anecdote there is, ask questions, right? Get aligned. Like a quote that I heard that I like internalizing more recently is that we don't have to be in agreement on everything, but we just have to be aligned. And that's more the values and the direction and the mission that we're coming across. The decisions we make and the little bits of judgment can be different as long as we're in sync with each other, as long as the value is parallel. Something like a report, sometimes it is a learning. Maybe there isn't probable cause. You can suss that out, but you need to ask the right questions and have the conversation. And to your point on trust, there has to be trust going both ways, and you have to demonstrate that and build that prior to, if you're going to have a successful outcome on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were connecting before the interview, and one thing that you were talking about was wellness. So what kind of things are your department heads doing to support officer wellness?
The awesome thing about working where I work is we get time on the clock to work out, which is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I did the math recently, and basically I get over $10,000 a year to work out. So I'm a part-time professional athlete,
Yeah, there you go.
I think that's huge. And obviously I'm biased because I do stuff for the Effective Fitness Training group. And I believe so strongly in your physical health, helping with all these other wellness aspects. That's huge. And we have officers that don't take advantage of that hour on the clock to work out, which just blows my mind. So if you work with me and you're not doing that, fix yourself. Anyways,
yeah.
So that's one thing. There's also, you can get counseling through the department. It's paid for in the event you need it. It's anonymous. So my understanding of it, because I haven't utilized it, but the department just gets a bill for hours. They don't know who used it or anything like that. And that's through the peer support team. Like I said, I've never used it, so I don't know exactly how it works, but I think that is an important thing as I talk to more officers and kind of see some of the underlying issues that are going on of things that haven't been worked through from traumatic incidents or whatever. I think that's a huge piece of it, is having the ability to get counseling or therapy. And the other thing that's neat is they do pay for a couple different services. So one is there's a local like cryotherapy place that also does like sports massages. So you get a certain number. I actually just did the sports massage a few weeks ago, which is awesome. And then different services as far as like body screening, body composition, blood test work, all that is done through the department, which is a nice feature. Again, going back to the physical side of things being tied to everything else, you need your body to be working correctly to kind of regulate some of these different things like stress hormones. Being physically healthy and having these different checkups done is huge, in my opinion, for staying mentally healthy.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I love that, you make the joke about being a professional athlete, being paid to train. But man, that's what any responsible officer is going to recognize. And that's what any responsible member of the public is going to recognize, is that you have a role which will require, more likely than not, at some point, some physical exertion, where I hope that you are training to the best level you can, which is like an athlete, right? You have to be mindful of output. You have to be mindful of what you're putting in as far as like nutrition, sleep, recovery. And so that's fantastic that your department's carving out time. My department, we're working on it. You are allowed to work out on duty, but it just boggles my mind when I hear about departments that don't allow it. They might even prohibit it. And then the counseling, that's something that we're doing better at for sure. Like we have a certain allotment that people can have, but I'm curious, do you know if people can just seek as many sessions as they want through the department, or is it like a certain number quarterly or yearly?
I think it's a certain number yearly. I'm not positive. Yeah.
It's something, right? There's ownership at every level, and some officers that are very wellness minded that I came up with, they work out through their whole career, right? They take their fitness level and their mental health seriously, but sometimes they relay the notion that like, hey, this is my responsibility. It's not the department's. I do this job, and I don't disagree, but at the same time, because of the shifts, because of the stress and all these other things, for the agency, my challenge is how do we make it a lower barrier of entry? How do we make it accessible? How do we make it usable, user-friendly, and tangible so that they actually do it? And I think that, that's through providing it in the ways that your PD is, to make it very accessible and socialized and officialized.
Yeah. And I think, again, going back to kind of culture, a lot of times we do build in blocks of training during our in-service training to talk about wellness, to talk about sleep and nutrition and stuff like that. And as another element of culture, like they bring in a therapist after a lot of critical incidents to debrief it with the officers involved. So whether it's a shooting or the death of a child or whatever, they actually bring a therapist in and sit in a circle and talk about it. And I know the older school cop mentality is to kind of poo-poo that, but everyone kind of reacts to things differently. And to hear everyone discuss the incident, and one of the incidents I was involved in, they brought the dispatcher in, and hearing that dispatcher's perspective kind of puts everything in a different light. And you appreciate a lot of different elements of what we do so much more when you hear what happened from these different perspectives, and you kind of can talk through that with someone who understands.
I think those debriefs are huge, and obviously I'm biased, being from peer support background and facilitating a host of those debriefs. But I've heard many people, that older generation you're talking about, they've come around or they're coming around. Some guys, came to me as a peer sergeant saying, "Hey, like I'm fine. Like trust me, I'm fine." But I think this would be helpful for the guys maybe. And just the fact that they recognize it could be helpful for others is great, right? Whether they think they get anything from it or not. But I would venture to guess or even bet that that sergeant got something from it. At the same time, I've heard people attend briefings in more of like a support role, not as peer support, but they were involved with the incident and they said that they processed it fine. They figured out what works, for them, whether it's talking to their spouse or what have you. But they said by being there, they recognize they can show up for their team. And so that's something that I like to pitch out for people that are unsure if they can get value or they feel like they don't get value is, hey, maybe by showing up, you're building this, synchronicity or building this support with your team that went through it, because you're absolutely right. We all metabolize or process things all in our own way. And maybe you don't get a lot of intrinsic value outside of the fact that you supported your buddy, and maybe you get a lot out of that. Or maybe just you sitting there saying nothing, just know that it helps them. I think that's huge too.
Yeah. And going back to the incident I just referenced, kind of to your point, I think I have some pretty healthy ways of dealing with stress. And I don't necessarily feel like I need to be at debriefs, kind of being able to discuss my role and stuff, and then taking ownership of, the incident I discussed earlier. There was definitely some mindset and tactics failures on my part, and being able to be in front of everyone and own that, one, I think is good for me. And then also for everyone else to kind of see, like culturally, that's what helps you get better is when everyone can recognize mistakes and not attach their ego to it and not get butthurt if someone calls them out for it. But like just throwing my own self under the bus and saying, here's what I did wrong, I think is an important part of it as well.
No, 100%. And what I hear is, peer leadership. I know that's important to you from connecting prior to the recording, but that's literally what you do to build trust, right? You show vulnerability. And what better way to be vulnerable than to say, hey, I made a mistake and here's what I did. Here's what I would have liked to do with what I know now and reflecting upon it. And then you're modeling that behavior, right? And there's a ton of studies that show, easier to see it oftentimes in the private sector, but the teams that are the most efficient, the companies that are the most profitable, they have a high degree of trust where sharing mistakes isn't punished. The more mistakes you share, the better you get as a team, and thus the more you grow and the more you accomplish. So I think that those are huge lessons that we need to pay attention to, especially with our job and our culture that oftentimes is not that way. Oftentimes maybe you share a sliver of quote unquote fall on your sword because you have to, or, the comfortable way to explain your decision. But really, like if we abandon ego, that's where we're really going to grow and make the difference.
Absolutely.
You touched a little bit on your own wellness practices to help you navigate the stress of the job. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Of course. The physical piece is huge. If your body's not firing on the right cylinders, all that is tied to, your hormone production, which is going to be tied to your mood, your weight gain, everything like that. Just being consistent. It's not like I have a PR setting workout every single time I'm in the gym. You can't. It's not possible. But being consistent, and even if it's not an amazing workout, at least I got in there and I did, I threw some weight around, or I ran or whatever. That's huge. I'm really big right now on journaling and reading before I go to bed. I heard an analogy that trying to go to bed at the end of your shift is kind of like trying to park a car in the garage while going 60 miles an hour. You need a little bit of time to decompress, especially at the end of a work week. And depending on where you work, maybe you work 12-hour shifts like we do. I know a lot of people are working a lot of mandatory overtime, but having some way to wind down at the end of your shift. So I listen to classical music on my way home. I journal and I read, and then I go to bed. And then really focusing on being present with my family. It's so easy to have a million different distractions, especially today with Instagram and all these different, social media outlets. And then, I've got my work phone, so I'm getting work emails and this and that, but really focusing when I'm home on being present with my wife, with my baby and my dog. My personal mantra is a strong body, resilient mind, and a household filled with laughter and love. I try to kind of I have that written down, and I try to focus what I'm doing on building those three things. And that, I think, is being conscious of what you're doing and why is huge for being mentally healthy and being well. I think especially with the job we do, it's easy to get jaded and cynical. And I think the interesting thing is after having a child, how much more humanity I feel on calls where, death investigations, for example, I've been on so many dead body calls, I don't even know a number. But after having a child, kind of seeing the family dynamics change for us and for my parents and my wife's parents, when I'm on calls where it's an elderly person, like an elderly grandmother passing away, I feel differently about that kind of thing now.
Yeah.
So I call it taking mental and emotional inventory, but being cognizant of what you're feeling and why, and then figuring out how to react in a healthy way to that, I think is so important for this job. And I think there's a lot of ego in a lot of police officers, and just learning to not have an ego about things will get you very far. And the number of times that I've been involved in stuff where it's not even anything crazy, but we had a domestic violence a couple of weeks ago where I was coming on for days. Night shift had been out with this female who had been involved in a DV with her girlfriend, and she ended up needing to go to the hospital for medical clearance, and the night shifters were getting annoyed with her. And I went in and she was giving everyone attitude. And the first thing I did, I was like, "Hey, what's your name?" She gave me her name. I'm like, "Hey, my name's Joey. I'm going to be here with you." And that changed everything about that contact, where we ended up having a really nice discussion for a couple hours while we were waiting for medical clearance. And at the end of all it, she's like, "You were the first person to treat me like human."
Yeah.
And I'm not putting our officers on blast or anything like that.
No, but we all have our moments.
Just bringing that human element to it, but then recognizing and kind of celebrating my own success there. When you look at everything as a challenge, a success, or an accomplishment to be had, I think that helps you so much with processing all these different calls where it's the first person to treat her well. That's something that I can internally celebrate.
Yeah.
And that, I think, helps me be more effective at my job and not get burned out, because every single situation I'm in, I'm kind of looking for a way to win and to celebrate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's a different flip of wanting to be better and to be competitive and to be effective. We all know what it's like to tell stories in roll call or briefing or whatever you call it. This awesome foot chase, or this person tried to sucker punch you and you did a, double leg takedown. These are really cool stories, and they should be celebrated. At the same time, I think it's really impactful to a culture when you celebrate this person that was livid and hated everyone, not just cops, but everyone in the world. And this one guy or gal talks to them for 40 minutes and then talks them down, or talks them into handcuffs, or talks them into a hospital gurney. Those are things that are so impactful, right? And you talk about the humanity. I definitely recognize a reflection and shift in me when I became a dad, because, yeah, you have a different stake in this world. It's not to say you don't care if you don't have kids, not at all. But for me, and I think parents will echo this, is when that happens, it flips a switch, or it maybe turns the dimmer way up, if you want to put it that way, to your awareness and, the stock you have. Because I don't know about for you, man, but for me, I've had a couple close calls in my career, and I've reflected on that positively, and it's helped me live forward in a different way. But truly, I was like, man, if I go, like, a bunch of people will be sad for a while. Some people will be sad for the rest of their lives, but it doesn't really impact things that much. Like, things happen, and I'm okay with that. You bring a kid in the world, you're like, oh man, like, I'm still going to do this dangerous job. It means that much more. And also how I live, is critical to this kid.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, man. Well, you are a wealth of information. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing everything. Just to kind of unpack a little bit more, that you recently ended with was, decompression. I think that's huge, right? Everyone has their way, and so I appreciate it. Joey isn't saying like his way is the way, but I'm going to challenge myself, right? I like the idea of journaling because, and this is something I've only dabbled in on and off, not consistently. I just want to address the response that a lot of listeners might have, which is, oh, I decompress in different ways, right? I watch TV, or I scroll my phone for a little bit. I'm going to challenge you because unless you're watching content that is truly calming and positive, a lot of us like to binge watch these really crazy dramas. That might not be the best for your nervous system and going into sleep. You have all these kind of thoughts, and I think a lot of high achievers and probably the people that are listening to this, are into self-development for the career. You probably have a lot of thoughts racing around, and just to put them on paper could be helpful. You could do it on your phone, but then you have that blue light, and then if you're scrolling, I guarantee you, no offense, and there's so much value in the work that Joey's doing through police post training, but that's not what I would recommend anyone look at before bed, or even stuff I post about, right?
Yeah, I recently saw a thing where they said that the average attention span is something like 13 seconds.
Oh, I bet that's long.
And so
yeah.
when you're scrolling on your phone and you're getting all these dopamine hits, you're getting pulled in a million different directions as you're scrolling, because each new scroll is a different thing. So you're not really decompressing at all by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, like, reading is nice because it's on paper. If you're doing something on a device, if you're like reading an ebook on your iPad, like, the temptation is so great to just really quickly open something else up. And then the same thing you said, like with journaling, and again, not for everyone, putting pen to paper. I write in cursive with a fountain pen, and like appreciating the, like, taking the time to form these letters as best as I can. There's kind of like a, in martial arts, like a kata to it, where you're perfecting this. So it's more than just writing down your thoughts or like talking about your day or whatever. You're also doing like a physical act that I think helps you ground you a lot, and it's something that helps kind of, that honing of your letters as you write, focusing on the penmanship, I think has an additional benefit apart from just writing down your thoughts and your events of the day.
Man, you're such an old soul. Have you always been told that?
Not really, but I saw something recently that says old soul is just a way to tell someone they're weird.
It's so good. No, you're certainly a Renaissance man, and old soul, Renaissance man, however you want to put it. A sincere compliment for me. I'm glad we've crossed paths. I'm a pretty weird dude. We're all weird. But when I look at someone like you and what you're doing, either in your personal practice or how you want to interact at work and with your colleagues, I'm like, okay, cool. I definitely note some things that I need to step up in my game, and that could be decompressing, right? That could be journaling. Not gonna bust out the fountain pen and cursive yet, but we all have something to strive towards. So appreciate your time, man. And Joey, is there anything you want to leave the listeners with, and also where they can find you? I know you mentioned your socials, but if you want to say it one more time, and it will be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, of course. So my personal page is 9mm Musashi, 9mm.musashi. I also run police post training. And as far as leaving people with something to chew on, everyone has a story. Make your own story one worth telling, and always be willing to hear someone else's.
I love it, man. I love that quote and also your mantra. And with that, I appreciate your time, man. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.